Welcome to Unit 7 of the CLPNM Jurisprudence Education module. In this unit, we will review the standards of practice and conduct related to client records and documentation. Documentation is anything written or electronically generated that describes the status of the client or the care given to the client. Effective documentation can positively affect quality of life and health outcomes for clients and minimize the risk of errors. As members of the healthcare team, nurses need to communicate information about clients accurately and in a timely, effective manner. The quality of client care depends largely on the healthcare provider's ability to communicate with other healthcare providers, including through their documentation. Documentation is the main means of ongoing communication about the client's care and progress. Therefore, it is a requirement for patient safety. When nurses fail to document in a timely, comprehensive manner, they compromise client safety and risk harm. Maintaining confidentiality is another important aspect of upholding the standards for client records and documentation. Whether the transfer of client information occurs through verbal reports, written documents, or electronic transfer, nurses must maintain confidentiality of the information. Nurses are legally and ethically obligated to keep information about clients confidential. You may not discuss the client's examination, observation, conversation, or treatment with other clients or with staff who are not involved in the client's care. Please pause the video, review this scenario, and consider which standard of client records and documentation was breached by the LPN. When you restart the video, I will discuss the scenario. In this scenario, Nisha was not in Sanjay's circle of care. She worked on a different unit and had no professional purpose to access Sanjay's health information. By accessing his health records, Nisha was in violation of her employer policies, the Personal Health Information Act, and her professional standards. Specifically, she was in breach of Standard 52, which states that practical nurses follow employers' guidelines and policies respecting the care and custody of client records when those guidelines and policies are consistent with applicable legislation, including the Personal Health Information Act. Nisha also violated her professional code of ethics, which calls on LPNs to protect and respect clients' rights to privacy and confidentiality. Nisha put her curiosity ahead of her clients' interests. She took advantage of her position of trust and failed to maintain an appropriate boundary between her role as a professional member of the facility staff and her role as Sanjay's family member. In doing so, Nisha fell short of meeting her professional obligations. Here is another client records and documentation scenario. Please pause the video, review the scenario, and consider how the LPN should proceed in order to uphold her client records and documentation standards. When you restart the video, I will discuss the scenario. After consulting her standards of practice and conduct, Parminder would note that she has a professional obligation under Standard 53 to advocate for employer guidelines and policies that are consistent with the standards of her profession and with the legislation that guides care and custody of client records. Parminder would also note that under Standard 64, a leadership standard that will be discussed in a later unit, she is expected to advocate for change when organizational practices impede the ability to meet clients' needs. To conclude the scenario, Parminder approached her director to speak about her concerns. Her director agreed to assign a unique username and password for each staff member and gets Parminder's input on a new policy that covers security of client information. The final client records and documentation standard, number 54, applies to LPNs practicing in a self-employed capacity. Self-employed LPNs are considered custodians of the client records and documentation they generate in their self-employed practices. A self-employed LPN must follow current legislation related to retaining, storing, and destroying client records. Further information on client records and documentation can be found in the CLPNM Practice Direction on Self-Employed Practice, which is available on the website. Please pause the video, review this scenario, and consider how Alan fell short of meeting his professional standards of client records and documentation. When you restart the video, I will discuss the scenario. Alan's commitment to preserve his client's confidentiality by shredding records may have been well-intentioned, but he failed to recognize his professional obligation in Standard 54 to retain client records for a minimum of 10 years. Even if he is no longer offering nursing foot care services, he was responsible for finding a way to preserve the client records in a confidential and secure manner for the duration of the 10-year period. He should also have been aware of the CLPNM's practice direction on self-employed practice. This means he should have established a policy on record retention and destruction, which would have guided him when deciding what to do with the records. Alan also failed to notify all of his nursing foot care clients about his intent to close his practice, including Francesca, who does not have access to social media. When Francesca tries to call Alan to book her next appointment, she will hear that his line is disconnected. She may feel anxious about the change in her routine and about finding a new nurse in her area. Alan could have better met his standards by speaking to Francesca well in advance of closing his practice and offering her contact information for other nurses who offer foot care nursing services in her community. If you have an understanding of the client records and documentation standards, please move on to the next unit to learn more about the standards related to leadership. If you have any questions about this unit, or if you have any other questions about practical nursing practice, please contact the CLPNM for more information.